Good morning and welcome to Roll's Math Channel, where factoring is always fun. This morning we have a trinomial 6x squared minus 29x plus 35. And we want to apply a trial and error technique, sometimes called unfoiling, to factoring it. Well, there are basically three steps that we have to follow. First, we look at the first term, which is 6x squared, and we think, what are all the ways that we can make the first term? The second thing we do is that we look at C, and we see that C is plus 35, so what are all the factors that make up 35? And finally, since it was plus, we only have to consider the combinations of the factors of the first term and those of C that will add to give us our middle term, or minus 29. So starting out, we'll take A is of course equal to 6 and B is equal to minus 29 and C here is equal to 35. So if we consider the factors of A, well, that's 6 and 1, and it's 2 and 3. So therefore, the possible ways for us to make that first term would be to have a 6x and for us to have an x term. Another way for us to make that first term is to have a 3x and a 2x. So those would be the possible ways that we could combine to get that first term. Now the second step says that we should look at the factors of 35. So of course there's 35, and if we multiplied it by 1 we'd get 35, so that's a pair of factors. And if we multiplied 7 times 5, that would be a second set of factors. Now we have the factors of 35, which are 35 and 1 and 7 and 5. So we want to consider the possibilities of their placement and what middle terms we get. So we could put the 35 here and the 1 here. Now what happens when we do that is we will get an outer term of 6x, and it'll be a negative 6x, and we'll get an inner term of a negative 35x. So when we add these two together, we get a negative 41x, and that is not our required middle term of minus 29. So what we have to do is we have to just start over and we could switch these two terms. We could put the 35 over here, and we could put the 1 over here. So now when we get our middle terms, we'd have the outer, which would be 6 times 35, or 210x, and we'd have our middle terms of x, and when we added those together we'd get a negative 211x, and that's not our required middle term. So we have now placed those terms in the positions that they could possibly be in, and we've not been able to come up with now we placed them in the positions that we could possibly place them, and we've not been able to come to get that. So now we have to consider our next pair, which is 7 and 5. So we'll put the 5 and 7 in there. And if we do, then in terms of our outer terms, we'll get 5 times 6, or we'll get 30x, and our middle one will be 7x. Both of those are negative, so therefore we get a minus 37x for the middle term. And again, those are not our required middle terms. So we will have to consider moving the position of the 7 and the 5. So we could put the 7 over here and put the 5 over here. And just clean up here a little bit. Okay, so we could consider putting the 5 and the 7 in those positions, and if we do that, we have minus 5 times x, and that would give us a minus 5x for the inner term, and the outer term would be 6 times 7, or 42x for those terms, and when we added those together, we get a 47x, and that's not our required middle term. So once again, that pair did not meet our requirement of getting our middle term. So we have to move on to the other possible combinations that we could have. That is, we have to consider our 3x and our 2x down here. And we'll put our terms in places and consider that. So we'll put a 1 here, put a 35 here. And in that case, our outer terms get to be 3 times 35, or 105x. And our inner terms get to be 2x. That's, minus 1 times 2, 3 times 35. And when we add those, we get a negative 107x. And that's not our required numbers. So once again, we could interchange those and see what we get. So if we do that, we put the 35 over here and put the 1 over here, and then reconsider the factors. So right here we'd have 2 times 35, which would be a minus 70x, and the outside terms would be a negative 3x, and when we add those together we'd get a negative 73x, and that's not our required terms. So those combinations would not work. We'll go back and reconsider the other factors that we have, moving 35 up and moving the 1 up, and we'll put the 5 in place, and we'll put this 7 in here. So what we have is we have the minus 5 times 2x, and that gives us a negative 10x. And the outer terms, we have 3 times 7, and that gives us a negative 21x. And when we add those, we get a negative 31x. So again, that is not the pair of combinations that leads us to the correct middle term. So we have to consider changing positions of those two. So we'll put the 5 where the 7 is. We'll put the 7 where the 5 is. And we'll redo our FOIL. So 2 times 7 will give us a negative 14x. And 3 times 5 will give us a negative 15x. And whenever we add, we get our negative 29x, which is indeed our middle term. So just go back and recheck and make sure that the first term, when we multiply the 3x times the 2x, we get the 6x squared, which is our required first term. And then the negative times the negative gives us our positive 7 times 5, which is 35, which are the terms of our original trinomial. So we know that we have factored it correctly. Well, just 3 steps, but a lot of combinations in the trial and error method until you reach the correct middle term. Thanks for listening, and